Your kind doesn't belong here. The words hit me like a slap as she stood on my doorstep, designer sunglasses, hiding cold eyes, manicured finger jabbing an eviction notice in my face. Blood rushed to my head as neighbors peeked through curtains, witnessing my humiliation. Little did this HOA dictator know, she just declared war on the one person who could annihilate her completely. See, I didn't just own my house, I legally owned hers too. When she realized this truth, her perfect world would shatter into pieces. I wouldn't just win, I would dismantle her entire kingdom of fear. Where are you watching this neighborhood showdown from? Drop a comment below. I'm curious how many of you have faced an HOA nightmare too. The California sun was beating down as I pulled into the driveway of my new home in Pinehurst Heights. After 12 years of working my ass off at a financial AI development company, I had finally saved enough to buy my dream house. A beautiful Spanish-style home with terracotta roof tiles and enough space in the backyard for the garden I'd always wanted. The palm trees lining the immaculate stone-paved streets swayed gently in the breeze, and I could see the community pool gleaming in the distance. This was it. This was everything I'd worked for. I took a deep breath and smiled, feeling like I'd finally made it. As I unloaded boxes for my rental truck, I mentally planned where everything would go. The home office with a view of the mountains, the kitchen with morning sunlight, perfect for coffee. The small garden where I'd grow herbs and vegetables. Maybe this neighborhood was a bit more upscale than what I was used to, but I'd earned it, hadn't I? That blissful feeling lasted exactly 3 days before I met Barbara Miller. She appeared at my doorstep at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, heels clicking aggressively on my walkway as if she were walking a runway instead of crossing a lawn. Everything about her screamed, "I'm in charge." From her perfectly coiffed blonde hair to her designer sunglasses to the clipboard she clutched like a weapon. "Jason Mitchell," she said, not really asking. "I'm Barbara Miller, president of the Pinehurst Heights Homeowners Association." She didn't offer her hand to shake. Instead, she thrust a thick binder at me. "Here's our HOA handbook. 52 pages of regulations every homeowner must follow. I suggest you familiarize yourself with it immediately." I tried to be polite, taking the binder with a smile. "Thanks for the welcome. I'm excited to be part of the community." She looked past me at the moving boxes still stacked in my living room, visible through the open door. Her lips tightened. "Those boxes need to be disposed of within 48 hours. Visible storage containers violate Regulation 3.7. Before I could respond, she was already scrutinizing my front yard, tapping her designer heel against the grass. "The lawn is over 2 in several spots. That's a violation of Regulation 2.4. And what are your plans for this area?" She gestured to a small patch where I had started preparing soil for a garden. "You do have pre-approved landscaping plans, correct?" I explained that I was just planning a small vegetable garden, nothing fancy. Barbara's eyebrows rose above her sunglasses. "Any exterior modifications require committee approval before implementation. You'll need to submit a formal request with detailed plans." As she turned to leave, her parting words felt more like a threat than advice. "Welcome to Pinehurst Heights, Mr. Mitchell. We maintain very high standards here. I suggest you meet them." I watched her walk away, thinking she was just being thorough. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a nightmare. Later that day, my next-door neighbor introduced himself as David Walker, a high school history teacher who had lived in Pinehurst Heights for 8 years. His friendly smile disappeared when I mentioned meeting Barbara. "Ah, so you've met the HOA devil," he said with a grimace. "Let me guess, she already found violations with your property." When I nodded, David sighed. "That's her specialty. She's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years. Last summer, she fined me $300 because my pride flag was not an approved exterior decoration. When I refused to take it down, she called my school principal, claiming I was causing neighborhood disturbances. I almost lost my job." His voice dropped lower. "G once cited an elderly couple for having their curtains 2 shades darker than the approved beige. Another family got fined because their trash can was 6 in too far from the curb. The last guy who tried fighting her ended up with so many violations and fines that he had to sell his house." I spent the next day carefully reading through the HOA handbook, and what I found was disturbing. The regulations were a contradictory maze. Lawn needed to be between 1 and 2 in, but also lush and full. Holiday decorations were permitted but only in tasteful colors that were nowhere defined. Exterior paint had to match the neighborhood aesthetic, but also be unique and characteristic. It seemed designed to create violations no matter what you did. I was determined to follow the rules to avoid trouble, so I spent Sunday removing all the boxes and making sure everything was in perfect order, at least according to what I could understand from the handbook. 3 days later, I returned home from work to find an official envelope stuck to my door. Inside was a $200 fine for unauthorized construction materials visible from street. Apparently those moving boxes I had already removed. When I pulled into my driveway the following evening, I caught Barbara and a middle-aged man in a polo shirt taking photos of my front yard. I stepped out of my car and approached them with a smile, determined to remain polite. "Good evening. Is there something I can help you with?" Barbara didn't even pretend to be embarrassed at being caught. "Frank Thompson, HOA board secretary." The man mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Barbara pointed to the small area where I had been preparing my garden. "Do you have approved plans for this landscape modification? Because if not, that's another violation." I explained that I had just submitted the request form that morning as instructed in the handbook. Barbara smiled thinly. "Requests take 30 to 60 days for approval. Until then, any modifications or violations subject to daily fine." As they walked away, I noticed my other neighbors quickly closing their curtains as if afraid of being seen watching the interaction. That night, I checked my security camera footage and discovered Barbara had returned 3 times during the day. Once with a measuring tape to check the distance from my mailbox to the curb, I began to understand this wasn't about maintaining community standards. This was about control and intimidation. As I scrolled through the HOA handbook again, I realized it was deliberately designed with contradictory rules that made it impossible to be fully compliant. The next morning, I found an unsigned note in my mailbox that simply read, "You don't belong here." I stood on my front porch, looking out at the perfect houses with their perfect lawns and felt a chill despite the warm California sun. "I've been too nice," I whispered to myself. "If she wants to play this game, then let's play it." Midnight, my phone lit up with an email from the HOA. Violation number 5. What was it this time? Excessive window illumination after 10 p.m. The joke was, I hadn't even been home last night. I was working late at the office. In just 2 weeks, Barbara had unleashed a barrage of absurd violations. A mailbox 3/4 of an inch too tall, a garage door open more than 30 minutes while unloading groceries, and my personal favorite, excessive bird activity. Because hummingbirds discovered my flowers. Each violation carried fines ranging from $200 to $500, creating a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as random enforcement. I hadn't paid any of them yet, but the threats were escalating. The latest notice mentioned potential liens against my property. After the 5th violation, I decided it was time to get professional help. I called my college friend, Megan Taylor, who had become a real estate attorney specializing in homeowner disputes. When I explained my situation, she wasn't surprised. HOAs have become notorious for this kind of behavior, she explained over coffee at a local cafe experiment that has been called the humane operation of Evergreen Park. They are ballsy people, accessible unlike all other groups that defy upgrades and upscale license. Megan shuffled through the violation neighborhoods. Have discovered that fines are a fantastic revenue stream. Megan shuffled through the violation notices, her frown deepening. Some of these aren't even in your HOA regulations. Others are extreme interpretations, like this one about the mailbox height. The Postal Service regulates mailboxes, not HOAs. And this garden violation. Your handbook says landscaping projects require approval, but it doesn't prohibit preparing the soil. Barbara is making up rules as she goes. I ran my hands through my hair, a nervous habit that was becoming more frequent. So what can I do? I'm not paying hundreds of dollars in fake violations. Megan suggested I try to rally some neighbors first to see if others had similar experiences. HOAs thrive on isolation. If you're fighting alone, you're easy to pick off, but united homeowners can force change. Taking her advice, I decided to host a small backyard barbecue that weekend, inviting David and a few other neighbors I'd managed to meet. To my surprise, about a dozen people showed up, though most seemed nervous, constantly glancing around as if afraid of being seen. Over burgers and beers, I heard horror story after horror story about Barbara's reign of terror. An older couple, the Johnsons, had been fined repeatedly for their grandson's toys being visible in their yard until they could no longer afford to have him visit. A Mexican-American family had been cited for excessive holiday decorations during Dia de los Muertos, ultimately forcing them to sell their home when the fines became unmanageable. Barbara targets anyone who doesn't fit her vision of what Pinterest height should be, explained an elderly woman who refused to give her name, fearing retribution. The most disturbing revelation came from David. There's no actual inspection process, he explained quietly. Barbara is the only one who issues violations. There's no committee, no oversight, no appeals process, despite what the handbook claims. Frank just rubber stamps whatever she decides. Another neighbor, a single mother named Lisa, added, "The funny thing is board members never get violations. Frank's house is peeling paint on the backside, but it's never been cited. It's all about who Barbara likes and who she doesn't." Everyone fell silent as a car slowly drove past my house. It wasn't Barbara, but the fear in my neighbor's eyes told me everything about the climate of intimidation she had created. Just as we were wrapping up the gathering, a sleek Mercedes pulled up in front of my house. Barbara stepped out, camera in hand, and began taking photos of all the cars parked on the street. "Unauthorized neighborhood event," she announced loudly, not bothering to approach. $500 fine. Expect the notice tomorrow. True to her word, the violation notice appeared on my door the next morning. This time, I didn't just file it away. I emailed the HOA board formally contesting the violation, citing the handbook section that specifically allowed for casual resident gatherings under 20 people. The response came within hours, not from the board, but from Barbara personally. "Your gathering exceeded noise limitations and created parking congestion. Further contests will result in additional fines for frivolous appeals." The email ended with a thinly veiled threat. "Continued disruption of neighborhood harmony may result in the board considering more serious actions against non-compliant homeowners." My security cameras began capturing Barbara standing in front of my house nearly every day, taking photos and making notes. Neighbors who had attended my barbecue stopped making eye contact when I waved. One apologetically explained that they couldn't risk becoming Barbara's next target. Megan suggested I investigate the HOA's finances. "As a homeowner, you have the right to see financial records. If Barbara is using fines as a personal revenue stream, that might be your leverage." When I emailed the HOA treasurer requesting financial statements, I received a curt reply that records were currently under audit and unavailable. When I pressed, citing California law that required HOAs to make financial records available to members, I was told the audit might take 6 to 8 months. This was getting nowhere fast. That evening, I called Megan again. "My company develops AI for analyzing mortgage data," I explained. "Sometimes we buy debt portfolios to train our algorithms. I wonder if we could find something in the public records about properties in this neighborhood." Megan thought it was worth trying. HOA board members often have financial interests in the community beyond just their homes. Dig into property records, contractor relationships, anything that might show conflicts of interest. The next day, I discovered my name on a no-access list, posted at the community pool entrance. A young girl was standing outside looking sad, waiting alone. Barbara's daughter, David whispered, appearing beside me. "She waits for her mom here every day by herself." I watched the girl kick at the ground, shoulders slumped. For the first time, I glimpsed something beyond my own frustration, a hint at what might be driving Barbara's need for control. As I walked home, I resolved to dig deeper, not just for my sake, but for everyone suffering under Barbara's tyranny. Something wasn't right in Pinterest Heights, and I was determined to find out what it was. Data never lies, and these numbers were telling a very interesting story. My dining table was covered with printouts, property records, HOA financial statements I'd managed to obtain from previous years, contractor invoices a sympathetic neighbor had shared, and notes from conversations with other homeowners. 3 days of intensive research had revealed patterns that couldn't be coincidental. Barbara had been HOA president for 8 years, but the last proper board election had occurred only 6 years ago. According to the bylaws, elections should happen every 2 years. Even more interesting, the HOA had hired the same landscaping company, Premier Outdoor Solutions, for the past 5 years, despite their quotes being consistently 30 to 40% higher than market rates. A quick business records search showed that Premier was owned by Barbara's brother-in-law. "This is textbook self-debul," Megan said, examining my findings. "Using HOA funds to hire family members at inflated rates is explicitly prohibited in California Civil Code. And the election issue, that's another clear violation. The law requires regular elections with proper notice to all homeowners. I nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and anger. There's more. Look at this fine revenue. I showed her a spreadsheet tracking estimated fine income based on what neighbors had shared. The HOA collected around $50,000 in fines last year, but only $15,000 appears in the financial statements. Where's the rest? Megan's eyes widened. If she's pocketing fine money, that's embezzlement. Criminal, not just civil. But we need more proof. My research was revealing a pattern of exploitation and financial misconduct that went far beyond petty tyranny. But hard evidence was still elusive. With Megan's help, I began reaching out to former HOA board members who had moved away. One former treasurer who now lived in Arizona was particularly helpful. I was forced out after questioning some invoices, he explained over the phone. Brano would collect fines in cash, claiming it was easier for homeowners. But then only some of that money made it into the official accounts. When I asked for receipts, she accused me of questioning her integrity and had me removed from the board. He emailed me copies of notes he'd kept, showing discrepancies between reported fine collection and bank deposit. The pieces were coming together, but I still needed more concrete evidence to take action. Interestingly, during my research, I discovered my company had acquired a mortgage debt portfolio that included loans from our neighborhood, though I couldn't access specific details without a formal business reason. As I continued my investigation, Barbara seemed to sense I was up to something. The harassment intensified. My mailbox was stuffed with new violation notices, some for infractions so absurd they were almost comical. Excessive bird activity near residents was my personal favorite, apparently because a couple of hummingbirds had discovered the flowers I'd planted. When I formally contested each violation, citing the relevant sections of the HOA handbook, Frank Thompson personally delivered a letter to my door. "Your continued resistance is creating a hostile environment," he said nervously, avoiding eye contact. "Things will get much worse if you don't fall in line. Barbara has ways of making people leave when she wants them gone." I received an invoice for $1,500 for accumulated violations with a demand for payment within 10 days. Megan warned me, this isn't just HOA overreach anymore. Falsifying violation notices constitutes fraud under California law. What she's doing has criminal implications. The most revealing moment came when I accidentally met the previous owner of my house at a local coffee shop. I recognized her from a photo on the real estate listing and introduced myself. Her expression darkened when I mentioned my address. "Oh, you're the one who bought my house. Good luck. You'll need it." Over the next half hour, she shared her nightmare. Barbara had targeted her family with relentless violations shortly after they'd renovated the house. Nothing we did was ever right. The fines kept coming until we couldn't afford to fight anymore. The weird thing was, she seemed specifically fixated on our house, not just generally mean like she was with others. When I asked why, her answer sent chills down my spine. Barbara wanted our house for her daughter. They had been renting after her divorce, and our place was the perfect size and location for them. But they couldn't afford it when it first went on market. I think she was trying to drive us out so they could get it cheaper. Then someone else bought it before they could. I guess that someone was you. Now everything made sense. I wasn't just any new neighbor. I was the person who had inadvertently thwarted Barbara's plans. This wasn't random harassment. It was personal. When I returned home that evening, my security cameras captured Barbara standing in front of my house with her daughter trailing silently behind her. "This should have been our home," she told the girl, not realizing her words were being recorded. "People like him don't deserve to live here." Her daughter didn't respond, just stared at the ground. There was something heartbreaking in the girl's posture, shoulders hunched, physically distancing herself from her mother, even while standing beside her. I was beginning to see Barbara not just as a villain, but as someone whose desperation had warped into cruelty. That night, I discovered someone had spray-painted "Not for people like you" across my garage door. The message was clear, but so was my resolve. This had gone beyond HOA disputes into harassment and possibly hate crimes. My security camera had captured a hooded figure spraying the message at 2 o'clock in the morning, but the image was too blurry for positive identification. Still, the timing right after I'd begun investigating the HOA finances seemed far from coincidental. I reported the vandalism to the police, who took a report, but warned me it would be difficult to prove who was responsible. As I scrubbed the paint off my garage door the next morning, David came over to help. "This has gone too far," he said, looking genuinely disturbed. "Barbara's been terrible to many people, but this is a new level." After we finished cleaning, David invited me in for coffee and shared something significant. He had been keeping a journal of HOA abuses for years, documenting every questionable fine and selective enforcement he'd witnessed. "I've been too scared to use it," he admitted, "but maybe it's time." With mounting evidence and growing neighbor support, I decided it was time to confront Barbara publicly. The monthly HOA meeting was coming up in 3 days, the perfect opportunity to bring everything into the light. Plastic chairs arranged in neat rows, every eye following me as I entered. No smiles. The community room of the Pinrest Heights clubhouse was filled to capacity for the monthly HOA meeting. Unusual according to David, who said these meetings typically attracted only a handful of residents. Word had spread about my growing conflict with Barbara, and people were curious to see what would happen. Barbara sat at a folding table at the front of the room, flanked by Frank Thompson and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Her expression remained impassive behind large designer sunglasses which she didn't remove, despite being indoors. I took a seat in the back row, Megan beside me with a briefcase full of documents we'd spent days organizing. The tension in the room was palpable as Barbara called the meeting to order precisely at 7 o'clock. The first 40 minutes were excruciating. Detailed reports about landscaping expenses, pool maintenance schedules, and upcoming community events, all delivered in Barbara's monotone voice. When she finally reached open forum on the agenda, she announced, "Each resident may speak for exactly 2 minutes on pre-approved topics submitted in writing at least 48 hours before the meeting." I stood up immediately. I didn't submit a topic because the bylaws state any member may address financial concerns during open forum without prior approval. Article 7, Section 3. Barbara's mouth tightened. "That's an outdated bylaw." Megan stood beside me. "Actually, Mrs. Miller, that bylaw was reaffirmed in the most recent version filed with the county recorder's office last year. I have a copy here if you'd like to review it." The room went completely silent. Barbara's face flushed, but she nodded stiffly. "Fine, 2 minutes, Mr. Mitchell." I walked to the front of the room, facing the community rather than the board table. For the past month, I've experienced what many of you already know: selective enforcement of HOA rules, excessive fines, and intimidation tactics. I began passing out packets Megan and I had prepared. What you might not know is that our HOA has violated numerous state laws regarding financial transparency, board elections, and conflict of interest. Methodically laid out what I'd discovered: the missing election cycles, the inflated contracts with Barbara's brother-in-law's company, the discrepancies in fine revenue. As I spoke, I could see residents' expressions changing from passive interest to shock and anger. One elderly gentleman interrupted me. "Are you saying the $2,500 special assessment last year for emergency landscaping went to her family's company?" I nodded at 40% above market rate, according to 3 independent quotes I've obtained. The room erupted in conversation. Barbara banged a gavel repeatedly. "Order. This is slander without evidence." But I wasn't finished. I explained how homes with certain demographics seemed to receive more violations, how fine money appeared to be missing from official accounts, and how the HOA had failed to follow its own bylaws regarding membership rights. As my 2 minutes stretched to 10, with no one attempting to stop me, Barbara's composure cracked. "This is a coordinated attack on volunteer board members who have given countless hours to maintain property values," she shouted, standing up. "Mr. Mitchell has been in violation since day 1, and is retaliating because he doesn't want to follow our standards." Frank tried to call for adjournment, but several homeowners shouted objections. Then something unexpected happened. David Walker, who had always been so afraid of confrontation, stood up from his seat. "I've lived here 8 years, David said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've been fined for a pride flag, for having a friend stay too long, for planting unapproved flowers. While board members' violations are ignored, I've kept records of every inconsistency." He held up a thick notebook. "This isn't about maintaining standards. It's about control and money. One by one, other residents began to stand, sharing their own stories of selective enforcement and intimidation. A woman described being fined for her religious holiday decorations. An Asian American couple recounted being cited for cooking odors when no such regulation existed. A single father explained how he'd been repeatedly fined for his children's toys, while the board member next door had an unregistered boat in his driveway for years, without consequence. The dam had broken, and years of resentment poured out. Barbara attempted to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. When she tried to adjourn without addressing the concerns, Megan stood up again. Mrs. Miller, under California Civil Code, an HOA board cannot adjourn a meeting when financial improprieties have been alleged without addressing those concerns, or scheduling a special meeting specifically for that purpose. I hadn't seen Barbara look uncertain before, but she did now, glancing at Frank, who appeared equally lost. Fine, she snapped. A special meeting will be scheduled to address these baseless accusations. Until then, this meeting is suspended. As people began to leave, Barbara pushed through the crowd to intercept me at the door. You've made a serious mistake, she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I've lived here 15 years. I know everyone who matters. You won't win this. She looked directly into my eyes. I own this neighborhood. People like you don't belong here. The next morning, I found an official-looking construction permit taped to my front door, declaring my house in violation of building codes and potentially subject to demolition. My heart raced until I examined it more closely. The permit was fake with no official seals or signatures. Still, several neighbors had seen it and were now avoiding me, clearly believing I was in serious trouble. Within hours, a city building inspector arrived, explaining that someone had reported unauthorized structural modifications at my address. Megan rushed over to help resolve the situation, confirming to the inspector that this was a fraudulent complaint. This has crossed the line into criminal behavior, Megan warned after the inspector left. Falsifying government documents is a serious offense under California law. We need to report this to the police. As the day progressed, my phone exploded with messages from neighbors who had attended the meeting. Some offering support, others reporting that Barbara was spreading rumors. I was under investigation for mortgage fraud. That evening, I received an alarming call from my bank, informing me that someone had attempted to place a freeze on my assets, claiming I was under investigation for financial crimes. The bank had blocked the attempt as suspicious, but wanted to verify I wasn't having identity theft issues. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, staring at my computer screen, displaying mortgage data, I received an email confirmation I'd requested from work. Your company acquired debt package B47, including 24 mortgage loans in Pinehurst Heights. Scrolling through the address list, I suddenly stopped, my heart pounding. No way, this is Barbara's address. The pieces fell into place with stunning clarity. Through a bizarre coincidence, my company now held Barbara Miller's mortgage, along with those of many other Pinehurst Heights residents. And according to the records, she was 3 months behind on payments. I need to confirm something about debt package B47 that we acquired last year, I said to my former supervisor over the phone the next morning. Mark had been my boss before I moved to independent project development, and he still managed the company's debt acquisition division. That's the San Diego suburban portfolio, right? What about it? He asked. I tried to keep my voice casual. I need to check some specific properties in that portfolio for a new algorithm I'm developing. Can you give me access to the detailed loan data? Mark didn't see any issue with it. I had legitimate business reasons to examine mortgage data for AI development, and within an hour, I had complete access to the loan information for all 24 Pinehurst Heights properties my company had acquired, including Barbara Miller's home. What I discovered was both enlightening and somewhat sad. Barbara had refinanced her home 3 years ago at a high interest rate, presumably after her divorce. She had been making payments regularly until about 4 months ago when she began falling behind. She had sent a hardship letter requesting payment deferment, which had been automatically declined by her system. I was the supervisor who had signed off on that decline, never knowing who Barbara the system had flagged her loan for potential foreclosure proceedings, though these hadn't yet begun. Further research revealed Barbara had maxed out credit cards and had a tax lien against her from the previous year. The woman who projected such wealth and power was actually drowning in debt, likely using HOA fines to supplement her income. This explained her desperate need to maintain control of the HOA and access to its funds. With Megan's guidance, I carefully considered how to use this information. Legally, your company has the right to begin foreclosure proceedings, she explained. But there are ethical considerations, not to mention potential perceptions of personal vendetta if you pursue this. I agreed. Using my position to take someone's home, even someone who had tried to take mine, felt wrong, but the knowledge gave me leverage and a better understanding of what I was dealing with. David had introduced me to the former HOA treasurer who Barbara had forced out. He provided concrete evidence of financial mismanagement. Bank statements showing fine money being deposited into accounts not belonging to the HOA, invoices that had been altered after approval, and emails in which Barbara had threatened him when he raised concerns. She told me she'd make sure I'd never sell my house for market value if I didn't resign, he explained. Given what she'd done to others, I believed her. The harassment escalated dramatically over the next few days. A fake eviction notice appeared on my front door, causing neighbors to believe I was being forced out. Someone broke my living room window, leaving a note that simply read, "Go away." I filed police reports for each incident, but Barbara had already spread rumors that I was being investigated for fraud, making some officers initially skeptical of my claims. When I tried to use the community pool, the attendant informed me that my membership privileges had been revoked due to unpaid violations. A resident discreetly showed me a video they'd recorded of Barbara instructing the attendant, "I don't care if he has the right to be here. Find a reason to deny him." The constant stress began taking a toll. I had trouble sleeping, startled at every noise, and found myself checking my security cameras obsessively. The breaking point came when I discovered my car had been keyed overnight with leaves scratched deep into the paint. Something in me snapped. I began packing boxes, researching homes for sale in other neighborhoods, even calling a realtor to discuss listing my house. As I sorted through papers in my home office, I came across an old letter from my parents that I'd packed during the move. It was something they'd written when I bought my first apartment. "You don't need to win against anyone. Just don't let anyone take what rightfully belongs to you." I stopped packing. The letter clutched in my hand. My parents had come to this country with nothing, worked their entire lives to provide opportunities for me, and taught me to stand up for what was right. I couldn't let Barbara win, not just for my sake, but for everyone in the neighborhood she had terrorized. From my window that evening, I caught a glimpse of Barbara alone in her house across the street. The curtains were open and I could see her at her dining table, hands trembling as she sorted through a stack of bills. A framed family photo lay face down beside her. For a moment, I saw something human in her. A single mother struggling to maintain the illusion of success, terrified of losing the only thing she had left. My security cameras captured a conversation between Barbara and Frank in her driveway later that night. "I've nearly lost everything," she said, her voice breaking. "If I lose this house, what do I have left? He has to go, whatever it takes." Despite my growing understanding of her desperation, I couldn't excuse her actions. It was time to fight back, not just for myself, but for the entire community. Megan and I developed a multi-phase strategy. First, we would distribute a formal notice to all residents detailing the legal violations of the HOA board, along with resources for reporting these violations to state authorities. Second, we would gather signatures requesting a complete audit of the HOA finances, which required only 25% of homeowners under California law. Third, we would hire a private investigator to gather evidence of Barbara's specific actions, particularly any that crossed into criminal territory, like the falsified building permit. David helped organize a secret meeting of supportive residents, and more people than I expected showed up. Nearly 30 homeowners, all with stories of abuse and all eager to see change. "She's not invincible," I told the group. "She's maintained power through fear and isolation. Together we can take back our neighborhood." As I left the secret meeting, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting a personal battle anymore. I was leading a community toward justice, but I also knew Barbara would respond with everything she had when cornered. Her desperation made her dangerous. Walking home under the streetlights, I rehearsed what I would say at the emergency HOA meeting we had forced the board to call. I didn't want revenge. I wanted, but I couldn't deny feeling a certain satisfaction, knowing that if things went wrong, I held the ultimate leverage. Barbara Miller had no idea that the house she was so desperate to protect was, in a strange twist of fate, partially under my control. 32 letters delivered simultaneously, 32 truths revealed. The morning after our secret meeting, every household in Pinehurst Heights received a detailed packet documenting the HOA's legal violations, Barbara's conflicts of interest, the missing financial records, and the board's failure to hold required elections. The packets included contact information for state regulatory agencies, step-by-step instructions for reporting violations, and a petition calling for an emergency meeting to remove the current board. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. My phone began ringing non-stop with neighbors expressing support, sharing additional evidence, or offering to help collect signatures. Barbara's reaction was equally swift. She called an emergency board meeting that evening to address false rumors and coordinate a response to defamatory attacks on the board's integrity. We hadn't expected the community's response to be so overwhelming. A resident shared a video of Barbara screaming at the pool attendant for accepting my HOA dues payment, and it quickly went viral on a popular video sharing platform. A local news reporter contacted me about doing a story on HOA abuse in upscale communities. When Barbara's emergency board meeting convened at the clubhouse, she was shocked to find nearly every homeowner in attendance along with a reporter from the local paper. She attempted to have the journalist removed, but Megan quickly pointed out that HOA meetings were legally required to be open to the public under California's Common Interest Development Open Meeting Act. Barbara's face was a mask of barely controlled rage as she called the meeting to order. "We are here to address a coordinated campaign of lies and defamation being spread by a disgruntled homeowner who refuses to comply with our community standards," she began. I sat quietly as Barbara spent 20 minutes describing me as a troublemaker who had violated numerous HOA regulations and was now retaliating to avoid paying legitimate fines. She claimed all financial matters were handled properly, all contracts were awarded through competitive bidding, and all violations were documented according to established procedures. When she finished, she looked triumphantly around the room, clearly expecting supportive nods from the community she had dominated for so long. Instead, she was met with stony silence. Then I stood up, Megan and a man in a suit beside me. "I'd like to introduce Terry Williams from the county inspector's office," I said calmly. "He's been reviewing the evidence we've gathered of financial improprieties, selective enforcement, and procedural violations." Williams confirmed that his office had opened an official investigation based on the documentation we had provided, including evidence of misappropriated funds and falsified records. One by one, I presented the evidence we had gathered. Bank statements showing fine money being deposited into unauthorized accounts, inflated invoices from Barbara's brother-in-law's company, documentation of violations selectively enforced based on homeowner characteristics, and proof that required elections had not been held. Barbara's face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. When I finished, I asked a simple question. "Mrs. Miller, would you like to explain why homeowner fine payments were deposited into your personal account on at least 11 occasions in the past year?" Barbara lunged to her feet, sending her chair crashing backward. "This is all fabricated. You're trying to destroy everything I've built." She threw her pen in my direction. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Barbara's composure, her carefully cultivated image of control, had completely shattered. Then something unexpected happened. David Walker rose from his seat in the middle of the room. "Enough." His voice rang out stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I've been silent for too long." The room fell quiet as David, who always seemed so mild-mannered, stood tall for the first time. "For years, I've watched Barbara target anyone different. Minorities, single parents, same-sex couples. When she tried to get me fired from my teaching job for hanging a pride flag, I should have fought back. Instead, I took it down and stayed quiet." He moved to the front of the room, opening his notebook. "But I've documented everything. Every selective enforcement, every inconsistency, every abuse of power." One by one, other residents stood up, sharing similar experiences. A woman described being fined for religious holiday decorations while board members had excessive Christmas displays. An elderly man explained how he'd been repeatedly cited for having his grandchildren's toys in the yard, while Frank Thompson's unregistered boat sat in his driveway for years. Frank Thompson, who had been sitting silently beside Barbara throughout the meeting, suddenly stood up. "I can't do this anymore," Frank said, his voice shaking. "What they're saying is true. I've been falsifying violation reports at Barbara's direction for years." The room went completely silent. "She threatened to reveal personal information about me if I didn't cooperate." And it's not just the violations. We haven't held a proper election because Barbara discards ballots for candidates she doesn't approve. Barbara stared at Frank in disbelief, her face contorted with rage. You trade her, she hissed. After everything I've covered up for you, Frank continued, ignoring her. The special assessment last year for landscaping. That money went directly to her brother-in-law's company at nearly double the going rate. I have copies of the actual bids and the inflated contracts she created afterward. The county inspector was taking rapid notes as Frank spoke. Barbara's phone rang and she answered it, turning away from the crowd. Do it now, she screamed into the phone. I want him out right now. She stormed out of the meeting without another word. As the meeting continued without her, discussing the formation of an interim board and plans for a proper election, I received an urgent text from my neighbor. Come home now. Something's happening at your house. When I arrived home, I found a crew of workers digging up my front yard with a sign declaring emergency utility repair. Barbara stood supervising, a triumphant smile on her face. Looks like you won't be able to access your home for a few days. Water main emergency. Such a shame. A resident approached me discreetly, showing me a video they just recorded of Barbara directly paying the work crew. They're not from the utility company, they whispered. They're landscapers and borrowed vests. I approached Barbara calmly. You know this is illegal, right? Falsifying a utility emergency, trespassing, property damage. She laughed dismissively. Prove it. By the time you do, your precious garden will be a mud pit and you'll have been sleeping in a hotel for a week. Her eyes were wild, desperate. This is my neighborhood. I decide who stays and who goes. I smiled slightly, maintaining my composure. Mrs. Miller, do you know who owns your mortgage? Her smile faltered. What are you talking about? I explained quietly. The company I work for acquired your mortgage loan in a debt portfolio purchase last year. You're 3 months behind on payments. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. You're lying. I showed her the loan documentation on my phone. I'm not. And technically my company could begin foreclosure proceedings tomorrow. Barbara tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the panic in her eyes. I don't care. I still control this neighborhood. Just then 2 police cars pulled up, responding to calls from multiple residents about the fake utility work. As the officers approached, I received a text from Megan. Police have arrest warrant for Barbara, fraud and document forgery charges filed. Barbara's arrogance quickly turned to panic as the officers explained the situation. They asked her to come to the station for questioning, and as they led her toward the police car, I found myself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had given me such power over someone who had tried to destroy me. The mortgage information gave me enormous leverage, but using it to take her home would make me no better than her. There had to be a more just resolution, one that would bring healing to the community rather than more pain. I asked the officers for a moment to speak with Barbara. I know about your financial struggles, I said quietly. I know you've been using HOA funds to try to keep your head above water. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. What do you want? To humiliate me further. Never had an HOA meeting been so well attended. Perhaps because for the first time residents felt their voices would actually be heard. The emergency meeting to determine the future of the Pinehurst Heights HOA was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Thursday, but people began arriving at 6, eager to secure seats. The clubhouse was filled beyond capacity, with some residents standing along the walls. Local news crews set up cameras outside, prevented from entering only by fire code restrictions on room capacity. Barbara had tried to block the meeting, sending cease and desist letters to everyone involved. But with Frank's cooperation and evidence of election tampering, a judge had issued an emergency injunction, allowing the meeting to proceed without her involvement. The viral video of Barbara's behavior had reached millions of views, and 3 local news stations had run stories about a brutal nightmare in Pinehurst Heights. I opened the meeting by presenting the complete findings of our investigation, now supported by the county inspector's preliminary report. The financial audit revealed that over $60,000 in HOA funds had been misappropriated in the past 2 years alone. The inspector confirmed that criminal investigations were underway, focusing on embezzlement, fraud, and falsification of documents. Barbara was conspicuously absent, having been released on bail, but ordered to stay away from HOA functions pending resolution of the criminal charges. An interim board had been appointed by the court with elections scheduled for the following month. As the meeting progressed, residents who had previously been too intimidated to speak now shared their experiences openly, creating a cathartic atmosphere of shared relief and emerging solidarity. Midway through the meeting, the clubhouse doors flew open and Barbara stormed in, ignoring the court order. "This is an illegal meeting," she shouted. "I'll sue every one of you for defamation." Two police officers who had been stationed outside quickly followed her in, but I raised my hand to stop them. "It's all right. Mrs. Miller should hear what her neighbors have to say." Barbara glared at me with undisguised hatred. "You think you've won? I have lawyers preparing lawsuits against everyone involved in this coup. When I'm done, none of you will be able to sell your homes for half what you paid." Her threats, once so effective at silencing criticism, now fell on deaf ears. The community had moved beyond fear. "Before you continue threatening everyone," I said calmly, "I want to make a proposal." I explained to the assembled residents that my company had acquired a portfolio of mortgages that included Barbara's home and approximately 60% of the properties in Pinehurst Heights. Under normal circumstances, foreclosure proceedings would begin at this point for homeowners 3 months behind on payments. Barbara's eyes widened in shock as I continued, "But I believe in second chances and community healing." Before I could finish, the clubhouse doors opened again and a teenage girl walked in. Barbara's daughter. "Mom, I can't take this anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to move again." Barbara's expression changed instantly, the mask of arrogance falling away to reveal raw fear and vulnerability. She reached for her daughter, pulling her close in a protective embrace. "I lost my job after the divorce," Barbara said quietly, her voice unsteady. "I nearly lost our previous house. Almost lost custody because I couldn't provide a stable home. The HOA was the only thing I could control. I was afraid all the time." The room fell silent as Barbara held her daughter. Years of built-up pretense dissolving in a moment of genuine emotion. Many of us were seeing her as a human being for the first time rather than just an antagonist. I stepped forward with my proposal. Barbara would resign from the HOA board permanently, return all improperly collected fines to homeowners, and agree to community service hours beautifying the neighborhood parks. In exchange, my company would help restructure her mortgage, giving her additional time to become current on payments. "Everyone deserves a second chance," I said, looking around the room. "But this community also deserves justice and healing." 2 weeks later, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. Nearly every resident attended, many meeting their neighbors properly for the first time after years of living behind closed doors out of fear of HOA scrutiny. David Walker, once too afraid to speak up, was serving as interim HOA president until proper elections could be held. "I used to be afraid," he told me as we flipped burger. "Now I understand that justice doesn't come unless someone stands up for it." As the sun set over Pinehurst Heights that evening, I looked around at what we had accomplished. Not just the defeat of a bully, but the rebirth of a true community. There are bullies everywhere, hiding behind rules and regulations. But remember this: sometimes the house you're trying to evict me from actually belongs to me. True victory isn't about defeating enemies, it's about building community where everyone has a voice. Share your HOA experiences below. Together we can turn neighborhoods back into communities. That's the end. Or is it? BD Stories always has another plot twist hiding behind the next clip.